Hi, I'm Dr. John Douillard, and today I want to talk to you about the importance of pranayama for optimal breast health. October is the month that we do everything we can to support, understand breast health and for breast cancer. And there's so much research on pranayama breathing techniques, yoga, breathing, and meditation, in fact, for the benefits of breast health. In one study with 42 volunteers with breast cancer, they did yoga and breathing meditation for 3 months, and they saw a significant increase in all the antioxidant support, which actually flushes the lymphatic system, increase in glutathione, which is a liver enzyme that does detoxification, decrease in any type of oxidated cells. Another study showed, which I think is the most important part, increased oxygen saturation. We all have heard, and it's true, that when the body becomes sick and we're not getting enough oxygen into the tissues become hypoxic, and they increase what are called hypoxic stem cells, which are stem cells that grow cancer cells, particularly when there's not enough oxygen in the tissues. And pranayama, breathing, and meditation have been shown to increase the oxygen saturation. I'm going to tell you exactly how that works in a minute, and it's really, really important. But it's also been shown, these breathing techniques, to decrease blood lactate, toxic chemicals in your bloodstream, increase what's called apoptosis, which is the time cellular death for these rogue cells that really shouldn't be there. They got to go, and it supports the natural kind of dissolution of those cells. And of course, it's been shown to increase telomeres, which was Nobel Prize winning science by Elizabeth Blackburn, who did research on telomeres and longevity and stress, shortening telomeres, and therefore shortening longevity. Okay, so let's dig in here a little bit more about how pranayama would actually work. Well, pranayama is a breathing technique, right? And breathing techniques primarily use the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is really important because studies show that women who have breast cancer, had a significant number of them had congestion in the anterior diaphragmatic lymph nodes, the lymph nodes around your breast. So I think everybody sort of gets the idea that breast health is linked to lymphatic health. This is something well understood in Ayurveda. We always evaluate the lymphatic system first in Ayurveda, which is the drains of your body. The blood, which we evaluate in Western medicine first, which is you take your blood, look at the blood, no doubt has incredible value, but it's looking at the blood, which is the faucets, as opposed to the drains. And in most systems, the drains get clogged, things back up. And the lymph around the breast is just overwhelming amount of lymph in the breast tissue. And it's been shown to be congested when you have breast health issues or breast cancer. So it's really important to evaluate that. Well, guess what the number one lymphatic pump in your body is? It's all your muscles, but the diaphragm being one of the major lymphatic pumps in your body. In fact, one of the major jobs of the diaphragm to contract during a breathing exercise, for example, is to actually pump all the lymphatic congestion away from your abdominal cavity. The lion's share of the lymph in your body lines your intestinal tract in your abdominal cavity. If you don't have great digestion, you don't have stellar digestion, we have no issues with any type of food, there's a really good chance you can't eat wheat, dairy, nuts, seeds, goitrogens, lectins, nightshades, and if you become a little bit sensitive to those foods, there's a good chance you're not breaking them down completely. The studies show they will go undigested into your small intestine. They will be too big to get into your bloodstream. So the fats, the environmental pollutants, the proteins like the gluten, the dairy, and others will go undigested, too big for your blood. They go to your lymph and they slowly congest your lymph. The lion's share of lymph around your belly, so you get extra weight around your belly and your hips first. But in short order, the whole circulatory lymphatic system gets congested. And of course, exercise and movement, yoga, is so critical for lymphatic movement. Any type of movement, exercise, walking will do a similar thing for the lymphatic system as well. But the yoga tied to breathing activates the full contraction and the full relaxation of your diaphragm. And if your diaphragm isn't contracting and relaxing fully, you're not going to have a big, powerful lymphatic pump. And in studies with most women, a good percentage of women with breast cancer have congestion of the anterior diaphragmatic lymph nodes. So it's really important to understand the connection between your digestion and your lymphatic system and your breast health. They all connect in a really important fashion. In fact, when your diaphragm doesn't contract fully, and this is true for almost all of us, by the way, and in these COVID times, so important that the major muscle of breathing is functional for you, right? And now, in fact, certain breathing techniques that strengthen the diaphragm called inspiratory muscle training are actually being used now to screen and prevent for COVID. So the rates of hospitalization and ventilation, all that become dramatically less. And this is what's being recommended now to hospitals to protect, because people don't breathe well going into a situation like that. So that's really important. And when the rib, got to remember now, the rib cage has what's called elastic recoil. It wants to squeeze down on your heart and your lungs 26,000 breaths per day. And your diaphragm is this big muscle that pumps the air in and forces the rib cage to be open. And then you breathe 26,000 times like that. But if you're sitting around slouching in your car, driving on the couch, watching a movie, whatever, your diaphragm just kind of stays. And you can exercise for an hour a day, but the other, period of the day, big chunk of it, your diaphragm is in a position, unlike our ancestors where they were moving and squatting and walking and exercising and running and hiking and whatever, their diaphragm was forced to contract in a way that was much more prevalent than ours. So we have studies that show that with elite athletes, professional athletes, only half of them had a diaphragm that was contracting fully and relaxing fully, which means that you and I probably don't have a diaphragm that's contracting and relaxing fully. And that means that it's not pulling the air down. The rib cage gets tighter and tighter and tighter to become cage-like. And that rib should be like 12 levers massaging your heart and your lungs 26,000 breaths per day, pumping the lymph out of your chest, your lungs, your heart, and your breast tissue. How critically important is that, right? So breathing, how simple it is, doesn't cost you anything, really, really simple. And there's more. When your diaphragm is not contracting and relaxing fully, you're going to breathe more shallow because the rib cage has gotten so tight, you have to breathe in the upper chest very shallowly. And as a result of that, we overbreathe, which means we breathe in excessive amounts of oxygen that we don't actually need. We actually breathe in 75% of the oxygen we breathe in studies show that we breathe out 75%, which means we don't actually use 75% of the oxygen that we actually take in, which is crazy. Why are we breathing in so much extra? That's because we're not using our diaphragm to bring the air all the way down into the lower lobes of our lungs, which takes time. And that during that period of time, what happens is the CO2 levels begin to rise slowly. And when the CO2 levels rise at a point where they're high enough, it'll trigger the need to breathe and also trigger the release of all that oxygen into your tissues, your brain, your breast, your lungs, your heart, your muscles. Really great for athletic performance as well and brain function. But if you're over breathing oxygen and you're breathing out the CO2 way too aggressively because you're never breathing into the lower lobes of your lungs, you end up with way too much oxygen, which is a stimulating, anxiety-provoking molecule, and way too little CO2, which is a calming, sedative molecule. We become anxious, we overbreathe, and we start to do this little mini hyperventilation. And that's why when you put a paper bag over your mouth and you hyperventilate, it calms you down because you're rebreathing CO2. And most of us have shifted our balance to being too much O2, too little CO2. And that happens because your diaphragm isn't strong enough to pull against the rigidity of your rib cage, and that's what pranayama breathing exercises do, right? Which is just phenomenal that it does that. And it does it in a couple of different ways. One, by just strengthening your diaphragm, pulls the air in, gives you a tendency to have longer, slower breathing. And you can practice longer, slower breathing just by going for a walk and counting your steps on the inhale, 1, 2, 3 steps on the inhale, 1, 2, 3 steps on the exhale, through the nose, because the nose has turbines that make the air go into a swirling stream that penetrates all the way down into the lower lobes of your lungs. Your mouth is upper chest, fight or flight, bear in the woods type of a respiration, right? But the nose breathing calms you down neurologically by activating the lower lobes, where the predominance of parasympathetic receptors are, to help chill you out, change your brain chemistry, change your brainwave production. I've written so many articles on the science behind pranayama, changing neuroplasticity, helping us to release old patterns of behavior emotionally that we carry for our whole lifetime. This is what Ayurveda and yoga is about. It's about freeing ourselves from old underlying impressions and emotional constrictions and patterns of behavior that were wonderful as kids but don't serve us as adults. That's what the whole thing is about, is for us to become conscious and not live and act and think based on old emotional protective patterns, right? So that's the beauty of it. But for the breast, so critically important that we actually have a rib cage that's not a cage squeezing on your heart and lungs 26,000 times a day, but actually moving and breathing. Pranayama is not pranayama unless you actually include a breath retention, which you have to gradually work towards. In the articles that I teach some breathing techniques that I think are critically important. There's a breathing, there's a breathing technique called Pratiloma, which is a breathing technique used in Ayurveda to strengthen the muscles of inspiration. And studies in a Western breathing technique called Inspiratory muscle training, basically the exact breathing technique that they used thousands of years ago, has now been studied, used in every single hospital around the world for heart health, for lung failure, heart failure, underlying digestive issues, heartburn and GERD, because the diaphragm, when it moves, it actually massages the esophagus, which moves to the diaphragm and the stomach underneath it. That complex of diaphragm, esophagus, stomach, heart, lungs, that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's all about how you breathe. The results of the research on it is phenomenal. So that inspiratory muscle training breathing technique is exactly like the ancient Ayurvedic breathing technique called Pratiloma. And I wrote an article called Strengthen Your Lungs Now, Pratiloma. And that's a breathing technique. I highly recommend you watch that video, learn that breathing technique. It's on my website at lifespa.com. Type in Strengthen Your Lungs Now, Pratiloma, or just type in Strengthen Your Lungs Now. You'll get that breathing technique. I think that's a really important breathing technique. Another one that's really important for getting the rib cage to really move is a breathing technique called Bhastrika. Bhastrika, or my 1-minute meditation, which I've been teaching that for decades now, how to use a breathing technique to give you a quick 1-minute meditation. That breathing technique, I think, is really important as well. And I've written an article and a video how to actually do that. And then the final one is Kapalabhati. Kapalabhati is that one where you snap your stomach and you force the air out of your lungs into your head, and it's called the skull cleansing technique. But it's really good to really get that diaphragm to contract and relax for us. And those three are really beautiful that I would recommend, and I've written articles about the science behind each of those and the how to do it, so you can actually watch how to do it. To start with, and then I would use the Pratiloma, which is where you really simply just partially close both nostrils and you breathe in against resistance. So try that with me right now. Take your fingers, partially close your nostrils, breathe in all the way to the top, top. When you feel your diaphragm under here beginning to contract, and that's actually your diaphragm moving maybe for the first time, you feel it moving. And you do 10 of those. Pratilomas in, out, relax. 10, all the way in and out. Do 10 of those, rest for a minute, then do 10 more, rest for a minute, do 10 more, and that's the round for the diaphragm. Then in the Strengthen Your Lungs Now exercise, I give you the how to actually move into doing breath retention along with that. And that's called Kumbhaka, or breath retention, what Western medicine calls intermittent hypoxia. And for breast health, this is really important. When the studies on intermittent hypoxia, which means actually holding your breath, letting CO2 levels rise a little bit, which will force all the oxygen from your blood locked to your hemoglobin molecule and dump it into your breast tissue, your brain, your muscles, everywhere in your body. And you won't have hypoxic stem cell activation in your breast tissue, you'll have oxygenation there. So it's really important to change that chemistry. And studies show when you do intermittent hypoxia, you increase stem cells, not mutagenic stem cells, but the good guys, the one that do the repair. EPO, the hormone Lance Armstrong got busted for injecting. You make it yourself. Nitric oxide, Nobel Prize winning molecule. Neuroplasticity, changing old brainwaves. Lower blood pressure, lower blood sugar, as well as protecting your genome with the transcription factor 53 called the guardian of your genome. So it's this genetic predisposition. You want to make sure that you actually are using your own breathing technique to support the production of these transcription factors, as well as all the other benefits of breath retention, which is why in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, they say, which are some of the original texts on pranayama breathing, say it's not really pranayama until you actually engage with breath hold. Prana means breath, and yama means to pause or hold or to lengthen the breath. So it's all about lengthening the breath, and when that happens, CO2 levels rise, oxygen gets forced into your tissues. It doesn't just stay in your blood. We all of us have 98% oxygen in our blood. That's great. But how much of that is in your tissues? That depends on how CO2 tolerant you are, and that you get by doing proper pranayama breathing exercise. So read the article on pranayama for breast health. It's up on my website right now at lifespa.com. Check it out. Really important information, obviously not just for breast health, but for so many other things. But check it out. Just wonderful knowledge of that wonderful ancient wisdom now backed by so much amazing science. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard.